Good evening and welcome to the second National Issues Forum of 2019. I'm Monica Gomez. The title of tonight's discussion is Nation in Debt. How can we pay the bills? For the next 90 minutes, as we examine the national debt, keep in mind that the National Issues Forums are gatherings of ordinary citizens held across the country to encourage neutral, nonpartisan discussion of issues that affect all Americans. Our in-studio panel is made up of local citizens from all walks of life, as well as representatives from forums that were held earlier in various locations. The format of our discussion uses what's called choice work to examine topics from different perspectives. We know that no one choice is the perfect answer, so the forum is designed to make us think, to clarify what we value and believe in, and to help us consider acceptable compromises. You can join tonight's live discussion by phone. I'll give you the number to call right after we watch this brief introduction outlining the three choices regarding a nation in debt. How can we pay the bills?
Most of us use credit cards or borrow money at one time or another.
We have a mortgage on our house, but it would be a real problem if we spent way more than we made and racked up a bunch of debt.
How much is too much? The U.S. government is $21 trillion in debt. That seems like too much, especially since 43% of the country's debt is held by foreign investors.
A lot of people think we need to rein in the national debt, but they don't necessarily agree on how to do it. Here are three possible options, along with drawbacks to consider for each.
It's not right to pass this huge debt on to our kids. I think rich people and corporations should pay more in taxes because they earn more. And look, why should a family that makes $50,000 a year pay Social Security taxes on all of their earnings when a family that makes $500,000 only pays taxes on the first 27% of what they make? I think we should roll back the recent tax cuts.
And we should cut down on spending, especially in big-ticket programs like defense. Granted, we might not feel as safe if we cut down military spending, and I guess raising taxes could throw our economy into a tailspin. There would be trade-offs to consider.
Nobody wants to give up their benefits or programs, and politicians just go along with spending money we don't have to keep their base happy.
Right. We need ways to make the government stop overspending, like a constitutional amendment that forces the government to keep a balanced budget. A lot of states have that already.
Or making Congress show how each new program will be paid for before it can pass.
Pay as you go.
Government programs ought to be looked at every few years to make sure they're still working or even necessary before they get funded again.
More endless political wrangling.
And this could make it harder to deal with emergency situations like hurricanes or floods. And that could be a real drawback.
Sure, this can reduce future debt, but it doesn't do anything about all the debt we already have.
Right.
I think if we concentrated on improving the economy, that tax revenues would go up. And then the debt wouldn't be such a big problem in comparison. Things like better job training and a massive infrastructure program and lower corporate taxes could really help the U.S. compete financially with other countries.
But if we lower taxes and spend more, then the debt goes even higher, right? And it's already too large as is. Is that an acceptable trade-off? The national debt is complicated, and there's a lot of disagreement on how we should go about it.
Should all of us have to tighten our belts, or should we ask more from large corporations or those who are wealthy?
Should we take drastic action to force lawmakers to shrink the debt? And if we do, what services are we willing to live without?
To find answers, we need to deliberate about what we're willing to sacrifice and what will be the best decision for our communities and our country. We have to face up to some hard trade-offs. So let's start talking.
Welcome back. We'll dedicate about 20 minutes to discussing each of the three choices. To participate by phone, please call 594-5301 and gather your thoughts so that you can be concise when we do get you on the air. Also, please turn down the sound completely on your television before your call goes on the air. All right. Choice number one, to recap a little, says we need to agree to limits. We've been complacent about the size of government and the services and benefits it provides. Make vital sacrifices, including raising taxes and cutting spending. I'll let the silence linger until, there we go. Tom?
Everyone has their own pet program, and everyone would be happy to see somebody else's pet program cut. Everyone gets frustrated paying taxes, but doesn't mind the other guy paying more taxes. There's really no incentive in the system right now for either of these options to work.
Yes.
David. There's two functions, and they mentioned it in there that you've got to quit the spending and adding to the debt and cut and stop the bleeding, but that doesn't actually pay down the debt. I mean the total debt. But that's the first step, and it comes in the spending side of the program. When we've cut taxes in the past, we've actually raised more revenue. It's not a revenue process that we have to raise taxes. Usually when we raise taxes, it hurts the economy to the point where we don't raise as much revenue. So the revenue side of it is not the problem. It's that we've always just kept on spending, and increased spending is when the more revenue came in, and we've got to do that.
Mary?
Okay, I agree totally with David. It's axiomatic. When you lower taxes, automatically you get more revenue into the budget. But this goes way back. We have to look at all of these programs, and there have been some major programs over the years that have contributed to where we are now. The New Deal, a complete fiasco. We have to go back and look at these programs. Social Security was never meant to pay out. When they passed that, the average life expectancy was 62, and the age you collected it was 65. So the government never anticipated paying out this much money. The Great Society program, Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, all of these programs which have contributed greatly to this debt. And then we can get into all of the redundant programs, the waste, fraud, and abuse in the systems. And we all have to remember what our Constitution is based on and what is the function of the national government. It's very limited in scope, or at least it's supposed to be, and that is for the common defense, primarily. And then we've gotten off on all these wild goose chases with all these other programs.
Chet?
I hear what they're saying, but one of the major causes to the spike in debt of the last few years has been we're involved in 15 years, 17 years of war, and we've not done anything to pay for that. We just said roll it forward, continue to accumulate debt, as opposed to saying, okay, we're going to war, we need to raise money to fight that war. And whether it's war bonds or whether it's gas tax, any kinds of things that would raise money to pay for the war. But we have spent trillions of dollars fighting wars, and we haven't done anything to recoup that money. But one of the problems that I see in this particular section is we've tried the limits before, and politicians being what they are, they find ways around them. And it doesn't matter who is running the boat, we find ways to bring home the bacon, and that is another part of the whole issue.
All right. Austin?
I couldn't agree more with Mary here in the sense that this goes way back. And to be quite honest, during that time of both wars, this was the first time that the United States was thrown again on the national global stage. We had to push through. We had to move forward, because if not, where would we be today? However, underneath FDR, we had these alphabet agencies. You're talking more than almost near short of 1,000 executive orders. These are programs that were designed and manufactured for the time that they were in, and I would argue a couple years after the wars. But now we are suffering the effects of those agencies all the way through today. And it's scary to think that even in the future, a lot of these agencies won't only exist, they won't even be funded, they won't even be brought up in our Congress. They'll be merely 3 letters in a book that represent something of an era that's been forgotten in the past.
Anthony.
To add on to what Chet said, we've been spending way more than we have to on military spending. I feel as if spending so much money, like there was this cost for millions and millions of dollars for a jet that doesn't have any really use and function or anything over these wars. We're playing Big Brother all over the country, having so many bases around the country where war is not even prevalent. Yes, there are some states and countries that we do need to be in and occupy just to maintain that security between us, but spending so much money that really is just this empty war, because right now we're in this point of war. We're in this point of on the earth where everyone's actually starting to evolve into this mindset of, we don't really need war. We need to start fixing our oceans. We need to start fixing our infrastructure. We actually need to start getting ahead if we want to, in order to survive to our country. And honestly, these wars have been costing us so much. Spending money on troops, spending money on jets and helicopters, and that we don't really need. We do need, but even still, we have soldiers going out without a surplus, without the basic needs for toothbrush and everything. So where's that money going exactly? So I think we need to cut the spending, especially when the top 10 countries, that amount equals to what we spend on a year, on an annual basis.
All right, thank you. John?
Well, I believe that a lot of it is just the structure of what has evolved in Congress. You see our budget, and it's 12,000-page document? Who the heck reads that? So we as people can't hold our officials' feet to the fire and say, hey, why did you do this? Because nobody's actually seen it. What we need to do is change the way we allow our lawmakers to pass bills. They need to pass one issue at a time, no more than 20 pages so that people can understand it. They need to be very well aware that we are going to be able to read it at that point, and that we're going to be able to look it up, and we're not going to find ketchup testing still being done 20 years after the fact that we've already perfected ketchup. It's ridiculous, and we need to do one thing at a time so that we avoid pork, because that is the biggest waste of all of our money.
Thank you. We have a call from Norma. Good evening, Norma.
Good evening.
Please go ahead.
I am calling. Yes, I'm calling because I wanted to put in my 2 cents worth also. I agree with what some of the folks are saying about the military spending. It's been too many years that we have been involved in wars. And then the Pentagon charges exorbitant prices for a hammer and, et cetera, et cetera. And then my suggestion would be to hold the spending on the military and tax the upper 1%.
Apparently that concludes Norma's suggestions. Joanna, I don't know if you have a response regarding the caller or if you had something else in mind.
Partly it's the response to the caller, but it's also to Anthony. I am an immigrant from Poland, and we are thrilled and happy that the American troops are in Poland, because this gives us the sense of security and also gives a balance to the whole world, because Poland is very close to Russia. And now, of course, we can discuss about limiting the military spendings, but others are not limiting military spendings. They are signing treaties and they are saying, yes, we will stop, but they are not. So if we stop military spendings, after a while, where will we be? We will be defeated, and this should never happen.
Reggie?
Yeah, being a 32-year Army veteran myself, it's easier said than done. I mean, when you start talking about taking away money from the military, you're going to open up a whole bunch of different stuff. And safety, we got to look at safety. We look at the little things that's happening now around in our country. It ain't nothing compared to places. So you look around. Every time you think we're doing bad, take a look to your left and right. We're doing quite well. You could say we're spending too much, or is it when it comes down to military, but when it comes down to our safety, it means a lot. So I would be cautious when I say that. And then back to the young man here talking about the soldier going out with without a toothbrush or whatever, I can guarantee you that's not happening. They're doing quite well, and they got everything that they need to get out there.
Augie.
Yes, hi. When the Treasury Department started, if I believe in 1789, by the next year we already had a $75 million debt within 1 year. The only time we have not been in debt was in 1835 during the presidency of Andrew Jackson. That's the only time. So one of the issues is that we also forget that the U.S. government itself buys into the debt. We owe approximately $5 to $6 billion in debt, whether it be currency, whether it be buying Social Security, postal service, and so forth. So those are the issues that the $22 trillion debt that we have, it doesn't reflect 100% exactly what it is because there's so many little factors involved. One of the biggest issues that I think that's really, really important is that when we go into debt, the government, just like bankers, I guess, a layman's terms, they're so saying in the finance and the investment world, if you could use other people's money, use it. And so since the government looks at all of us as a tax base, then, all right, I'm going to take $10 from each person, so forth, and then we'll see what's best, Congress or whoever is in power, we'll see what's best used. Donald Trump in 2017, the tax break or code that was used in 2017, yes, it did bring in more revenue, but it did help a certain segment of the population better than others. The wealthier, it did help. It also, but the pro of it, for me, it was a con, but a pro of it is that we're at a 3.9 unemployment rate, and we've been like this for 9 months in a row, under 4%. That has not happened since the 1960s. So, what is exactly debt? I mean, can we just somehow figure out that the government would go into a system that greed is not involve pork issues? And that, I think, it's the biggest issue. It's not whether we get a debt, but how we manage that debt.
Sherry?
I was in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, and I saw what kind of things were going on in terms of our military spending. It seems to me, though, that although we are involved in the Middle East right now, we're still spending like we're at war with the whole world. You know, it's still that big world war effect, it seems to me. We're still buying so many extra weapons and jets and whatever, and we're spending a lot of money as if we were in this great big war, but we're not. So that's why I'd like to see us kind of dial it back a little bit in terms of military spending. That's just one aspect of it.
I'm going to go with Franklin and then Tom. Franklin.
I wanted to say what John said. I'm with John. I think what's happening is, first of all, people think the government's supposed to make a profit. They're not supposed to make a profit. They're supposed to manage national things, interstate highways, national emergencies. And what he was talking about is that they put these bills, they put so many things in them, you don't know what's in it. The public doesn't know what's in it. The people that are voting for it don't even know what's in it. They need to make the bills concise, short. They need to have a way where the public, just like when you're going to open a liquor store in a neighborhood, they put billboards and they put postings in the newspaper, who's opposed, who's for it, or they're going to put some kind of different zoning. Our federal government no longer represents the people. It represents the representatives, what they want instead of what the people want. So what's happening now is the money's being spent, what they call earmarks. This money is going to be I'll vote for yours if you vote for hers. If she votes for hers, we'll all get together and vote for this in one big bill instead of separate bills. And I think that's what the biggest problem is today.
Thank you. Tom?
I agree. It's a system problem. The congressmen, the senators, have no incentive to cut. When was the last time in a campaign a congressman or a senator came out and said, "I saved you that money"? Never, because there's 1,000 people saying, "Give me mine," and then the taxpayers each have to put in a little. A perfect example: the school reform that Texas is considering right now. People went down to testify against the tax increases, and there were, probably 1,000 people. A lot of them lobbyists and whatever, but there were probably 1,000 people. They said that the teachers would get $4,000 or $5,000 raise. You know how many teachers were there? All four sides of the Capitol outside were full. There had to be thousands and thousands and thousands. Because if you tell me, make a trip to Austin, it may get you $5,000, I'll go, as opposed to make a trip to Austin and you may save $100.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Karina and Adam and Mary and Chet, and I'll figure it out after that. Karina.
What bothers me is this country has developed into a nation of debtors. And debt seems to be encouraged through any means possible. I can't tell you of a week that I haven't gotten some kind of offer in the mail. I can get this credit card or that credit card for only X percentage. And I think it's got to stop because it is so easy. They make it too easy to become debtors. We have to understand what they're doing to us, and we're falling into the trap.
This is why God made shredders. Adam.
I am with Karina about, how easy it is to get another credit card. And I'm also from Poland as Joanna. And, our system is a little bit different because the more debt you have, the harder for you is to get a credit because, if you have a lot of debt, you are not qualifying because they check your ratio, how much do you make and how much can you afford to pay. And here is just, in a way, they're pushing, just take it more. It is so easy, just take it. But, this country also has a tendency, I notice, we are so entitled and we want to pamper ourselves. We deserve this. We work hard. And, my perception is if you cannot put, at least 30 or 40% money to whatever you are buying, you don't deserve it yet. Keep working, and sooner or later you can, purchase whatever you are going to purchase, but you're going to be comfortable. You don't have to live from a paycheck and to paycheck, worry if what if I slip one paycheck and then who is going to cover for me?
Yes. Mary?
Okay, I just want to get back to the military spending. That's near and dear to my heart, being a 30-year veteran myself, because I think we have to study history. Those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it, and we have gone through this over and over and over through various wars in our country when we downsized the military too much, and then we were attacked, and we didn't have the resources. We didn't have the ability to fight appropriately. World War II, classic example. We had downsized so much, so Britain had to bear the brunt of that until we could get our forces built up again. We are the leading nation in this world. No one calls on Finland to defend themselves or to go fight for someone else, or God forbid, France. We had to help France and all these other countries. But we have to remember, we were attacked. That is an act of war. And so, yes, we've been there for a while, but you have to know your enemy and the threat. And the threat we're facing in the Middle East, it's not going away anytime soon. And then you add on to that China, Russia, North Korea. We have tremendous threats, and believe me, they want a weakened America. And then the last thought is our ratio of military spending compared to the overall budget is actually quite low. So I think the military budget is about 16% or so of the budget out of a $4 trillion budget. What is our biggest cost are our entitlement programs, and we need to work on those.
Chet.
I'd like to go back to a thread that Tom started, but didn't get where I thought he was going to go with it. It deals with the budget. The way it's supposed to work is the president is supposed to come up with a budget, pass it off to the Congress, and the Congress is supposed to create the budget, pass the budget, and enact the budget. One of the problems we have is we haven't had a budget passed by the Congress in several years. What we're doing is we're doing continuing resolutions, which is why we had a shutdown not too long ago, because they haven't got the will to negotiate and work out a deal where everyone gets a little but nobody gets everything. And this, I think, is another contributing factor to how we got where we are with the programs that don't necessarily work, and we aren't using Congress as an oversight or as an equal partner in government because they've defaulted. They didn't want the responsibility, they didn't take leadership, and so they let it get handed off to the administration. And now we're trying to fight back and forth over little bits and pieces as opposed to looking at the big picture and saying this is what we need to do to get back on more stable footing.
All right, I'm going to go over to Austin and Anthony, but first, you get to be our pivot speaker because, well, actually, we've already slopped over generously into choice number 2, let's face it, which says, strengthen checks and balances. The national debt's out of control because we lack the basic mechanisms to ensure the government acts responsibly. People willingly accept more benefits and programs than government can afford, and our political parties are too willing to help spend money we don't have. Take that, Austin.
So checks and balances. Ooh, something that's very interesting. I wonder where we've heard this before. Again, it's in our Constitution. And I'm going to love this because my high school professor is probably going to give me a good old call and copy with this one. It's called laissez-faire. Leave the market alone. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because when you have a national entity, and before that, we never had a functioning government like this. So the national entity, the king, His Majesty, he was not in charge of the budget. It was the purse. It was the purse of the king. So when we developed our government, you know, with Thomas Jefferson and these compromises and these checks and these balances, that's why we have the executive branch, the legislative, and the judicial. They check each other. But again, who checks the government on their purse? So we developed a treasury. But what exactly is the treasury? The Treasury is the one who takes all the money, they hold the money, they print the money, but where's the money going? So it goes over to Congress. It's going back and forth, back and forth. But up until our world wars, we have never had a system of industrialization. It wasn't up until we had Henry Ford's line where you had a bunch of people make something. We had to bring in women into the workforce in order to barely keep up with what Germany was producing for the First War. And even when the Second War began, we had to switch our entire economy again solely on the basis and fact of war. And now the main question that we have to face with is, have we transitioned from that? You know, I love how Ms. Lewis brought the whole thing up, is that we seem to be at war with everyone in the world. We're supposed to be leading here on the stage and everything when the world seems to be falling apart. You know, how do we shift? And I'm not going to argue that we need to defend our assets overseas, because that is a strong power. And I'm not going to attack anything like that of that nature or sort. I believe that our military production is very, very resourceful, and it is very good that we have that. But if we're solely a nation based on war, how are we going to lead our country, lead the world into the next stage? Peace? World peace? Who knows? But that question has got to start with us, since we are on the stage.
Anthony?
Yes, another thing that we should also check on is, you know, leisure spending that, you know, that we've been finding it within our government. You see the president spending on trips to Mar-a-Lago, and that could be paying for infrastructure. That could be paying for things that we need in our budgets, we need in our society that could be, beneficial to us. And also going back to what Austin said, that we've been playing off this paranoia. Like we've been so paranoid for so long, and in fear of something so bad that's going to happen. And I understand, because when you live through that time, when you live through such a stressful time, you feel like there's always some type of gun pointing to your head when there's not. And if we could get away from that, then maybe we can actually have a chance in maybe like pulling away from us. But if we don't check ourselves first, if we don't say, do we really need things? Like, do we really need this in our society? Then maybe we can actually make cutbacks. We need also to put checks on the universities, like how much money that they're putting debt into students. I'm a senior over there at the University of El Paso, and currently right now I'm at $18,000 in debt for a bachelor's degree. However, if we're able to downsize the debt the loan so much, then maybe we could actually start, instead of paying for all the loans that we're paying for, we could actually put money into the revenue itself. But so many students are in debt.
I'm going to just remind callers that we will take your phone calls at 594-5301, and we'll get you on the air as quickly as possible. Mary?
Okay, just to one last thought on the war and defense and what have you.
This is the last one. No, I'm just kidding.
Wars have been around since the beginning of mankind, and they will continue. And we have to be prepared. As Plato said, only the dead will never see war again. So keep that in mind. So that is an issue. The politicians did a very tricky thing, Chet, back in the 70s. They came up with what's called baseline budgeting. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but that is a mechanism where they determine how much they're going to spend, and they spend it all, and then they have automatic increases every single year based on top of that. So there's never any cutting down. According to the Government Accounting Office, they can't even account for at least $250 billion a year. Waste, fraud, and abuse. I just want to point out that we put too much faith in our government and our politicians sometimes. The government both created Social Security and they destroyed it. They created Medicare and Medicaid and they've destroyed it. So why don't we get back to the basics of individual responsibility and accountability? The young people of your generation, you will not have Social Security. You're going to pay into it all your life, but you won't have it. We are insolvent. There's only 15 years left of Social Security. The disability pension is already bankrupt. So
you're just full of good news.
I know. Sorry, I'm a realist. There's a saying, facts don't care about feelings. Okay.
I'll be right back to Franklin and John and David, but first a phone call from James. Good evening, James.
Good evening. Yes, I wanted to see if members on the panel had any thoughts about one of two policies that I have been thinking were pretty good ideas. The first one was the penny plan, which I guess incentivizes all departments to cut 1% of every dollar they spend, which would theoretically absolve the national debt in as little as 5 years. Or the other idea that I had or heard often was where department heads look for areas within their department budget that is not necessary to spend, and by saving the taxpayers and cutting money, they could earn a bonus.
Can anyone respond to that thought?
Yes.
Well, actually, Franklin was coming up, and he put his hand up.
Well, I think that idea for the penny plan is a good idea. They need to start finding ways to cut all the different appropriations that they had in the past. As for the military, I think the military is very important. The richest people in the world have the best bodyguards. They have the best security, and we're the best people in the world, so we should have the best military to protect us. So that's my personal opinion.
John,
I want to say one other thing.
I'm sorry.
When it comes to spending, people buy insurance. So if your house burns, it floods, hurricane, tornado, fire, well, taxpayers do the same thing. We put money into the government, so if a situation happens like the California fires, we should be using that money for them. When we had Hurricane Katrina, we should use that money for them. We had the hurricane in Puerto Rico, we should be using that money for them. Well, all these different things that are happening, we as taxpayers pay into the federal government like an insurance. So if certain areas of the country have great disasters, it doesn't matter who they voted for or who they didn't vote for, what religion they are or where they go to school, what it is, we paid into there to receive it when we need it, and they're not doing that.
Okay, John.
That really is a good topic to lead into this one. If I had been a person making $25,000 average over my entire work life, if you do the math, we've been putting in 7.65% of our wages, and our bosses have been matching it. So there's 15.30% going in to cover Medicare and Social Security. But that also covers Medicaid. And the Medicaid, okay, that's kind of an entitlement program that nobody's really paying into to get into it. But what we need to do is start weaning ourselves off of that program altogether, because if my boss paid the 7.65% in to continue to pay for the people that are currently collecting, and I was able to keep my 7.65% in order to invest it in something like an S&P 500 no-load mutual fund, I would have over $1 million in my pocket after 30 years of just making $25,000 a year average. Why we aren't allowing people to do that, it's like a voucher system for schools. You have some options. We're supposed to be a free country. As long as we play by the rules and we don't leave ourselves destitute by being irresponsible with that extra money, as long as we prove that we put it into an investable account, we should have more control over our own destiny that way.
David.
We've been doing these forums for many years now, and I was on the panel years ago, 15 years ago, when we were shuddering at a $3 trillion debt, and now it's $22 trillion, and it's out of control. We need to get reins on it and everything else, but obviously the panic we had at $3 trillion must not have been so bad, because we're still in business and such. The phone caller was talking about the penny plan, and I think he mentioned that in a number of years it would wipe out the debt. I think he was meaning the deficit. That I don't think it would wipe out the debt. The two words are interchanged a lot.
They both start with D. I'm confused.
The deficit is the a 1 year plan as overspending and such, and the debt is the accumulation of all those years. And we did have a few years back, a couple of years, where we actually balanced the budget and it had a slight surplus, and we did not add to the debt. Now, we didn't pay off any of the debt during that time, but we didn't add to it. So it can be done. And I'll mention a couple of words that used to send people running for hiding, and that's called Graham-Rudman. Senator Phil Gramm from Texas, a Republican, and Senator Warren Rudman from, I think, Wisconsin, a Democrat, co-sponsored the bill, and it was called Graham-Rudman. And all it didn't cut things. It didn't reduce the debt. But all it said was, if you're going to propose a new spending, you've got to come up with some cuts somewhere, or you've got to balance it and everything else. And we could not increase spending over the amount of the increase in GDP. So if we're, as long as your economy is going and growing and everything else, you can go ahead and increase some spending. But we were increasing spending even greater than that. And all it did was say, we've got to hold the reins to that level. And everybody hated it. I mean, it was the most hated bill in Congress, but it worked and such. The other thing that was hasn't actually been mentioned, but in Texas, we have to balance our budget and such, and we've got a sunshine law that we look at bills, agencies periodically, and if they're no longer necessary or they can be sunset. Excuse me, I said sunshine. I apologize. The Sunset Commission. And that's something that we need to look at, because there are bills that are just being funded indefinitely. And As far
Like
as,
the ketchup
as,
testing.
Yeah.
Yes.
As far as agencies saying, let's look for things we can cut and everything else, they don't. They actually, at the end of the fiscal year, try and spend as much as they can to make sure that they'll get that much again the next year. And we do need to be looking at things like that. But it can be done, and it has been done, and we need to do it again.
Jerome?
You know, I'm sitting here listening, and I wish everybody was as passionate about fixing our debt as they was to raising that wall.
We're not going to go there.
We're not going to go there.
Hold on. You just threw me off here. Okay.
Another phone.
All right, Jerome, that's the last time I'm calling on.
I'm just pushing back off the step.
It could happen. Okay, this is a solemn event. Let's continue. I'm going to go Mary and Anthony and Augie. Mary.
Okay, I just wanted to respond to one thing Augie said, because I think it's very important to note this. We are not undertaxed by any stretch of the imagination. And when we had the Tax Reform Act done last year or whatever, it did put more money in the middle class. When you cut corporate taxes, it's axiomatic. More jobs are created. More people are working. But anybody who thinks we are not paying enough taxes is sorely mistaken. You are taxed from the minute you get up in the morning to the minute you go to bed at night. Property taxes, sales taxes,
It continues
gas
while
taxes,
we're sleeping.
so forth and so on. And then you pay into Social Security, you start collecting, or your military pay, retired pay, and you're taxed again on it. And there's a misnomer that the rich don't pay their fair share. The top 5% of income earners pay 40 to 50% of the taxes. We have people who are not paying taxes. 50% of the people in this country do not pay taxes at all. And I say everybody has to have some skin in the game, because it's always easy to spend OPM, other people's money, versus your own. So you got to have some individual accountability too.
Augie?
No, I mean, Mary is right what she's saying, what she said. I've always believed in that controversial 10% tax. Mm-hmm. I've always believed it, and I still do. Because say you start from the bottom, small little shop, mama, and you make it. And all of a sudden you have 10, and then 10 years later you got 100, and you become a Walmart. Well, that's because you maybe worked really hard and you hit it on the right spot. Why should you be punished for that? But a 10% tax, I don't see nothing wrong with that. To me, it's kind of fair. It's integrity issue.
Are you talking about a flat tax?
A flat 10% tax. That's one thing. The other issue that I'm going back to something else that's also regarding the debt. We pay $80 million, and it coincides a little bit with the military, to Russia to go to space. I mean, we are a world power. We are the superpower. And I don't understand this, because that's a lot of money that we're giving to an enemy of ours. It's not an ally. Every single time we send an astronaut to space, we have to go through Russia and their vehicles, and we pay them $80 million. So all these little things add up to our debt. And last but not least, when you have a debt and the government doesn't care about continuing the debt, it's a lack of integrity. It's a lack of being honest to the country. And the reality is, I think it has to do a lot with big, powerful money. Like somebody said earlier, it's not us, the people. We vote for the reps, the senators and so forth. But from that point on forward, we have nothing to do. It's going to be some guy with a deep pocket, and here's $10 million.
Anthony?
Going back to what Franklin said, you were talking about how basically what we do with our government is kind of like insurance, where we basically, if there's wildfires, there's floods, there's anything, then, we have to, we rely on the government to help us out. Well, if we think about it, if we really think about this, a lot of these, when you go to your insurance, they ask for what are the facts about this car, what happened to this, why is it damaged? So if we can't even trust our scientists, who are paid people, who are smart, who have been going to universities to get doctor's degrees, if we cannot even trust them to say that global warming is not real, if we can't even trust them that any type of climate change is real, if we can't even trust them that a lot of different things that's happening around the world is affecting us, the oceans being polluted, a lot of the carbon being taken out of the ocean itself that are causing dead seas. If we cannot even look at the facts, then we're looking at a broken car and saying, well, I got my $10,000 from the bit being totaled, but you don't have a car anymore, and that's not going to even work anymore. So how can we function as a society if we're going to put ourselves more into debt right now, if we don't start fixing things, if we don't start changing things that are necessary to keep up? Because it's not going to matter if I don't have a Social Security in the next 15 years if there's no earth to actually live on. You know, so I'm thinking, and there's not going to be a military to depend on if there's not going to be any type of world for them to defend. So we really need to start actually trusting our professionals. We need to start trusting people who know what they're talking about instead of trusting politicians who do not have a degree in this except their philosophy or what they think about this, their stance on this.
All right. I'm going to go with Sherry, and then whoever else jumps up and down the highest, I guess. Sherry.
The bulk of our expenditures, according to statistics that were given to us in a booklet from the National Issues Forum, said that the biggest percentage of expenditures is to the health insurance programs. So is that an entitlement, Mary, I'm asking?
Mm-hmm.
That
considered one.
Health insurance is an entitlement. Okay, then, I'll get sick and die. Thank you.
Medicare, yes.
End of question. Okay.
Okay.
Oui. Yes. Mary.
Okay.
And then I'm going to
I just want to speak to my dear sweet friend Anthony here. Because I think we always have to remember there was one very smart man, and he said 3 words that you always have to follow: trust but verify. Because a so-called scientist tells you something does not mean it's so, because here's a newsflash: a lot of them are politically motivated. There is a big political agenda with the whole climate change. I call it a hoax, actually. Is the climate changing? Yes, all the time. It's called the weather, okay? And so when you hear politicians saying the world is going to end in 12 years unless we spend $93 trillion on all these programs, that is simply not true. They don't even know basic science, because the Earth is about 500 million years old. We have a life cycle of about 1 billion, so we're halfway through our life cycle as the Earth. Do I condone polluting and all that stuff? No, of course not. But I can tell you there's been a lot of false information put out by so-called scientists. And let me tell you one other thing. If there's consensus, it's not science, because you do not have consensus in research.
Did you have to say something, Anthony? I get the feeling you've got to say something.
Yes, I have to.
Okay, make it quick. Go ahead.
So I have to rebuttal against that. It's not just one scientist. There are many scientists. If you look at, there are actual videos of you going into the ocean, and you're seeing the Dead Seas. India right now is losing one of its biggest resources, which is the fish, which is like the seafood. Like if they don't have that, then they're gonna die. Then they're already feeling their government, and honestly, like their governments have been in trouble like since they've started. But even still, speaking on that, our world is, there's hundreds of $billions are going into damages that we shouldn't be going in. Like we're going back and forth between ice ages and like having a heat stroke in the middle of winter. But
okay,
yes, we're going back and forth between ice ages. My mother's family comes from northwest Italy, up towards the Alps, right below Switzerland, and the ice melted. And what did they find? Settlements, people underneath those glaciers. So what's that tell you? It had to be a lot warmer than it is now before.
Yes.
Climate's always changing.
I'm going to go with John and Franklin and figure it out after that. But you get to pivot to choice number 3, which is at this point. Okay, choice number 3 says we must invest in growth first. While our debt is huge, it will be less of a problem if we can increase the growth rate of our economy and ensure that our businesses are competitive internationally and have incentives to create jobs and invest here in the U.S., not overseas. Left you speechless, didn't it?
Well, yeah, because I was trying to think about what to say to him in a very short, compact way.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Just in my lifetime, we were going to be out of oil. We had an ozone that had holes in it. We had this and that, and how many, the rainforests, we were losing oxygen content within our breathable space. We're all still here. And by the way, the ozone healed itself somehow. I don't know, you know. It just seems a little bit ridiculous to me that by changing the kind of refrigerant we use in our car would solve that big of a problem. To go on to this other subject, though, a very smart man called my dad told me, son, don't ever make big changes at one time. We have our three choices that we're working upon making a decision between. We don't have to make a decision between those three choices. They are homogeneous. We can take a little bit of this
it away.
and a little bit of that, and you know, just take a little bit of each one and mix it in a pot to where it fits our lifestyle today, and it accomplishes what we need to accomplish. I'm a kind of guy that I want to do something not just to say that I did something, but to actually have results at the end of having done it. That's what this country needs to get back on track and think about what results are we going to have and how fast do we need to move. Do we want to make one big move forward and then have to dig ourselves way back out of a deep hole? Or do we want to kind of like slide into it and figure out, oh no, the water's too cold, let's get back out onto the dry beach?
Franklin?
We were talking earlier about the congressmen and representatives. I think one of the biggest fears we have today is disinformation, information that's incorrect, purposely put out there. In the old days, you used to see a guy appear before Congress and testify about if the airplane would fly or the submarine would float, and then they would have a debate. Nowadays, we have a bunch of small group of people that all decide what's best for us, and they have these millions of dollars they're given to decide what's best for them. We no longer have the people involved. We need to have, before they vote on any appropriations, to have a discussions where people of the public, like our show, National Issues Forum, has sent people to Congress in Washington to speak in the past, but we need people to go before Congress from all walks of life, giving their opinions, whether they be right or wrong, to let these congressmen realize they work for the people. They're not our managers managing the people. They work for us.
Sherry?
I conducted a couple of forums at the university on this topic, and I just wanted to insert here that this third option seemed to be the one that got the most sort of immediate positive response. Yeah, that's a good idea. Now, the other two options also had both positive and negative. My groups did really a good job of discussing it, and I was very pleased with them. But I wanted to say option 3 was the one where they got like, yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Jerome?
Of the many times of the times that I've been here with the National Issues Forum, this is probably one of the only subjects that actually had me speechless. Honestly, simply because, you know, we as a nation can agree this can fix the problem. Let's put our monies in this direction. The problem that we have is that our government says, okay, this is what they want, but they use the money for something else. And that's where the debt just goes out of hand. And then we as a nation, we don't stop it, we don't protest, we let it rise. And so now the debt is so out of hand, we don't care about the debt. We would honestly toss more money into fixing the debt, and it increases the debt. And that's the issue. I mean, that's where the problem lies. So if we're going to fix the problem, we need to say, okay, this is our national debt, this is our deficit. Let's pay off our bills, and then we can, in a sense, go into new debt. And until we address that issue, we're going to be here again like next year talking about it.
Save the issue books. Okay. Tom, and then Chet.
We're talking about investment in the economy to position us to pay off the debt. Guys, it doesn't work. Infrastructure. I don't know about you, but in El Paso, I'm a little tired of infrastructure projects. You can't find a road that's not being worked on. You can't find a bridge that's not being worked on.
You mean the orange cone is not our mascot?
No. And to Jerome's point, we have all these highway funds. What are we spending it on? Drive to the airport. We're putting up decorations. Okay? We're putting up decorations on the overpasses. We're building bike paths. That's all money that was earmarked for our roads, and it's being used for something else. Another big investment. Job training. Job training works real well for the companies running the job training programs and for the politicians taking pictures. Okay? 14 cents actually goes to instruction. Job Corps. I love the program. But you know what? 5 years out, those kids are no better off than if they had never been in the program. Where the kids are getting, and the taxpayers are getting shortchanged.
Chet?
I'd like to tie a couple of things together. Augie mentioned before about the fact that we pay $80 million to Russia to send people to the space station. And the waste that we see, if you look at what NASA's been able to do, NASA's done some incredibly wonderful things, but when you allow private people to get involved in this, you have a guy like Elon Musk who comes along and says, why do we throw away our rockets after one use? Why don't we find a way of bringing them back? And he is ready now to start sending people to the space station, and it's going to be done at a rate that's cheaper than we've ever seen before. He is able to do things that NASA can't do. For whatever reason, it just doesn't get done in the government. So why shouldn't we move more and more of this into the private sector, develop better, stronger private companies, maybe take away some of their purse power in PACs and that kind of stuff, and get back to allowing people to be people and corporations to be corporations and not necessarily treated the same in government. But one other point, and this goes to something that Mary started into, and we negotiated Medicare and we've got Medicaid, but the politicians refuse to allow us to negotiate drug prices. We're the only country in the world that doesn't negotiate drug prices. And they tell us you can't buy drugs in Mexico, but I don't see a whole lot of people in Mexico dropping in the streets because their drugs were wrong or their drugs were tainted. They won't let us buy drugs in Canada, but Canada pays 40% less than we do. So there's something wrong in our system that's allowing this to go. I think private growth would be a huge spur to us growing forward, and if we can take the cost out of government at the same time.
Adam?
Well, back to the government spending. I have a problem with our politicians. I feel like they do not represent us. They're just, they take for granted that it's a privilege for them to be there, represent us. And the way I see it, they just go there to enrich themselves. Mm-hmm. They have a different point, why, the point of view, why are they there? And, like the government spending, we have to focus on politicians to make them liable for passing the right laws, for limit the number of hours they spend to rewrite the same law back and forth. It's like a ping-pong game. 4 years is good, the next 4, so let's do it all over again, because chunks of money goes there, and sometimes, it's just wasted because they don't produce anything.
Austin?
So I love it because in each little area we're talking about a really interesting common factor, and that is the market. Where is the market? For the longest time, the States was originally designed and manufactured for Britain's empire, for their war on the seas. They didn't have any more trees in order to build masts, but the United States, they had these cedars that were huge beyond measure, capital, and they took it from there. And so all of a sudden the States were the colonies for ships, and then it turned into cotton, and then it turned into tobacco. And then every other nation is very strong about producing one thing. And then we had this huge shift where it was like, why are we only focusing on one item when we can do it all? And we really saw that roughly from the through the 1800s through now, through the 21st and 22nd century. So our markets now, you see our stock exchange up in New York. You go to London and you see theirs, and you go to China to see theirs. It's this whole nother world on its own, and it's almost horrifying, because it's like these different market systems, these different nation systems that are all over the place that kind of function as a human body with organs. Some are failing and some are not. Some are up and some are down. So I think if we're going to talk about a lot of growth, we need to discuss what is inevitable. Back in, I think it was 2008, 2009. You guys know a little bit more about this as myself, because I was much younger. I didn't really pay attention to the green line going up and down. But that recession where we had no more homeowners were buying, our market took a huge dip. And as of right now, we've been going up and up. But the thing of it is, instead of it being like a steady slope, this slope is huge. This slope is going almost straight up. And we had a little dip here and there, and now we're at that edge of the map where we're right here again. And it's almost horrifying to think of that if we run into another depression, I don't know how we're going to get out of this one.
John.
Well, Tom brought up an issue about education. If you think back through the early 1900s and the factory systems that were being created at that point, nobody knew how to make those products in those factories except the guy that invented them and the guy that invented the process to make them. So what did the factories do? They trained their own workers. Automobile manufacturers do that every day of the year. Every time they change a line, every time they change a feature on a vehicle, they have to retrain their own employees, and that's how they get the max out of their employee. That's how they expand. That's how they grow. We can do that with tech as well. You've got people that already have the scientific ability, the brain power. You've got the leaders to create the company. Make that education go direct and benefit the employee and the employer, and cut out the middleman. We did for years and years without a Department of Education at the federal level. Ever since we've had a Department of Education at the federal level, it's been a disaster. We've fallen off the map with regard to world ratings. We need to go back to something that used to work.
All right. I'm going to go with Anthony and then Mary and then Tom.
Talking about one of those markets that Austin was, talking about, like he was talking about markets, and one of the markets I want to talk about that I think like a lot of people have lost their voice in, and we don't really think about, is we think about like what tax money that goes to prisons, tax money that goes to a lot of jails, that we have a lot of repeat offenders. And we never really try to tackle the issues of why we have repeat offenders. Or even if we do, we never do something about it. So these people are constantly going in, and people who pay taxes are paying a lot of money just for these people to go in. They're paying for their toothbrushes, they're paying for everything, they're paying for their shoes, they're paying for all this different equipment that they're getting. And they still keep repeating offending. And why? Because a lot of laws make a lot of laws, or a lot of things that are a lot of rules set by different corporations or different jobs don't allow these people to get back into society to actually start filling in their need to put money in. And if we don't do that, then we just have, if you think about how many prisons and jails that are run by our government, that's a lot of people. And we keep these people down, especially by laws that are necessarily like pretty much old and from the 1930s, like from the 1930s or 1920s, that are so old and so shrouded in mystery that we don't even look into them. Like, why do we even create these laws? Just like how we talk about the New Deal, we talk about all these deals that were created before that at the time they seemed relevant, but now they don't. And now we're hurting ourselves because now we have all these people that want a second chance. And I'm not talking about the people like murderers, like those people. They had. That's something else. But for other people that had less serious crimes that deserve like a voice or a chance to come back into society and fulfill a role, we need to start filling in for that. And that includes people of mental health. That includes people with addiction, because these people find themselves repeatedly by our government because of pharmaceutical companies that eventually cause people to go into addiction. And after they run out of prescription, they go into the streets to get their drugs, and then they end up getting caught. And now they're into this thing where they're criminals themselves, and we have homeless people. So we need to start bringing people back into society.
Mary.
Okay, Anthony, it's a little bit more complicated than that. First of
You
all, as far as
two are going to have to keep it separate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, every time I come to a meeting, I say, okay, I'm going to be calm this time, but I'm so passionate. Yeah, addiction is a little bit more complicated than that. If it weren't opioids, it would be alcohol, it would be glue, it would be whatever. That is that personality. And I don't know if you realize this, but Prison Reform Act was just passed to help these people, okay? For Sherry's point about the option 3, spending more, we have done that over and over. It's called Keynesian economics. And the idea is to spend as a stimulus. The problem is the government never stops spending after that time. So it's kind of like the free credit cards that Karina talked about. And, you know, we have to have some individual responsibility. We don't spend more than we make for most of us, so we have to hold our government accountable too. And as far as our infrastructure, remember we had $1 trillion spent just a few years ago, 4 years ago, 4 years ago, to boost the economy. No one actually knows where that money went. Because here's a newsflash. Every time you fill up your car, part of the taxes that you pay on that gasoline are supposed to go into the highway fund. So we have all these funds that are supposed to be managed to deal with these issues. And then the politicians say, oh, well, there's no money in there. We need more money. We need to raise your taxes again. Baloney.
I'm going to go with Joanna.
Ms. Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, used to say, the government has no money. It's your money that if you want to pay for something. The next thing is that if we have a big government, it will always produce agencies, and it will produce bureaucracy, and it will be like a cancer with metastases. It will always develop, and it would always prove that this agency is absolutely indispensable, and there has to be another agency which is even more indispensable. And then we have all these agencies, and all of them work for themselves in order to keep themselves alive, and in order to find the reason for them to be funded by us taxpayers. So one of the things that we are talking now about the market, and Austin said about it, it's the market to regulate what we should do or not. And the most important thing is to keep the government small.
Reggie.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is a lot of this actually going to start at home. We got to teach our kids. We got to take responsibility of going back to the basics of doing the things to make sure our kids understand. We can't be letting. It's like we was talking about the government. Well, we can't just go to the government and let it do it. We got to teach. It's like we're doing it here. This is a great educational thing going on right now. And I wish the whole world was watching us while we're doing this, because we probably could get more done than what Congress is doing out there, just to get the information. So it's going to start at the basics. It's going to start at the basic level. It's going to start with us, with our grandkids. You know, us getting involved and doing that. That's going to be a big part of this, the change.
Franklin.
We call it our federal government. I also call it our national government. When I talked about national emergencies, national crisis, that's not only a hurricane or tornado or flood or forest fires. That's also when you have cities where people are killing each other, that the murder rate's out of control. There's cities where people have substance abuse that's out of control. That's when the federal government needs to spend money and go in there and find out, why are all these kids killing each other? We need to find out why the local authorities are failing and go in there. We're the federal government. We need to go over here and find out, why are all these people dying of drugs? We need to go in there as the federal government and spend money in that area and tackle each problem that's a national disaster, not just a hurricane or a flood or a tornado. A national disaster is when a lot of Americans are in grave danger or losing their lives.
I have a phone call from Mike. Good evening, Mike.
Hello.
Hello. Go ahead.
I would just I need to ask about the immigrants. We were sending like $450 million scholars to El Salvador, Ecuador, and Honduras. And now that we're getting all these immigrants right here in El Paso, the county of El Paso, are we gonna be stuck with a bill taking care of medical and feeding them and this? And then we're getting all these people that are sick, disease and everything. They don't have any vaccination, nothing. Who's gonna be paying for that?
Anybody have an answer for Mike?
The taxpayers.
That's usually a safe guess,
yeah,
the
that's
taxpayer.
another issue.
Yes, thank you for your call, Mike. We appreciate that. Augie.
You know, on the infrastructure of the U.S., we are really behind compared to a lot of other countries in Europe and in Australia. I would even say with certain things like bullet trains and bike lanes, if you will, safety issues, highways, and so forth. But one thing that I've always had a problem, and I've never understood about our government, when something is budgeted or earmarked to a certain agency, department, and so forth, so let's say they get $1 million, and they spend $950,000. Well, the next year they only get $950,000 because the director of that university or college or what have you was smart enough to budget $50,000, and he did it without that. So what happens a lot of times, and everybody knows that works for the government or at a school, it's like, hey, we got to spend $50,000 in the next 2 weeks, or else next year we're not going to get that $1 million. Let's buy, I don't know, $10,000 worth of pencils. We need calculators. Let's buy that. All kinds of silly stuff, and they have, 1,000 calculators and this and that. Just nonsense. So I've always believed that if a good director of a school or an agency, for that matter, is able to save the government money, you did a heck of a job. Next year we're going to give you $1,050,000 or $1,020,000 or what have you. And this way they're able to somehow just benefit the community, the college, the school, or whatever. That's one thing. And the other one is that our budget is also, we buy so much from China. And not only China, other countries, and I understand, market, capital. They produce cheaper goods than we do. We're more expensive. But everything that we're wearing here, a lot of stuff that we're wearing here and it's made here, is probably made in China. So our money, it's going to that country where it's getting very, very wealthy. They're buying a lot of our investment properties. And so before you know it, that's why we're borrowing so much. Before they're going to own the U.S. maybe in 100 years. I don't know when, but that's something that I don't understand.
We are within about the last 10 minutes of the program, and with this particular topic, it's kind of an odd one because, what can we go home and do this evening that will affect the national debt? That's a little tough to personalize, but if we could, let's think about what compromises we are willing to make. What are we willing to do as citizens that would make a difference? Anthony?
Going back to what Reggie said, going back to basics, we need to start being a city. We need to start being involved with not only just having this one demographic of older citizens, but have like a good demographic of a good amount of citizens that range from like maybe 20 that have a good idea of what's kind of going on to up and above, and actually start working towards a certain goal, because we will always have a different opinion. And we'll keep fighting towards something, but we never solve anything. And if we could put all these factors into our head and create a bulletin board and say, okay, what causes this, what causes that, then maybe we can actually reach some resolution instead of using our political ideologies just to back up to what we want instead of what we can compromise to. And I think that if we could just separate from that like political identity, then maybe we can actually start going back to our roots and actually saying, okay, we need to do this as a country, because it's not just Democrats are in debt and the Republicans are in debt. We're all in debt, no matter what. So we all need to work together towards a common goal instead of bickering.
Adam.
I guess one simple solution we all can do tonight or any other day, just buy made in America.
Good one. Yes. Austin.
So I love how you mentioned that it's kind of up to like a director, and then you have to spend the money like super quick when you receive a budget if you don't spend it throughout your year. And we've actually at the university we've suffered from this in the past, because we see it to where if you don't spend money in your department, it's either given to you back, or they say, well, you didn't spend it. Guess what? We're going to put it somewhere and allocate it somewhere else. You know, working for a student government, we send our students all over for conferences, for debates. I mean, you name it, we appropriate students to go. And we only work with $70,000. But if we don't spend that $70,000, forget it. Like, it goes away. And, you know, UT gets $5 million plus to send their students all over the place. But with our new R1 status, you know, it's a good question if we can put up a good argument that, hey, our UTEP's name is getting out there, could we receive more funds? But then if the next administration comes in, my fear is that if they don't spend it, are they going to take it away again? So I think it depends on how we use it, you know, how we use our money overall, you know, where we're putting investments, you know, foreign markets, our own, it just depends on the person.
John.
Well, you asked what programs we would be willing to give up on our own. Well, if you really think about what is supposed to be there, is very little. It's our government has assumed the rights of the states in a lot of cases to provide programs that more local governments and state governments are supposed to be providing in the first place. We really need to take a really good look at the Constitution and a really good look at the way the power structure is supposed to be built, and then go back to that and do it a little at a time. You know, it took a little bit at a time to get us to this point. Do it a little at a time. We probably won't even notice that we're giving up something.
Tom?
The states, I believe, have abdicated their responsibility in all this. Earlier, John talked about the Department of Education. It hasn't been around very long, but every year it has received an increase in its budget. And every year the U.S. standing internationally has gone down. Okay. The federal government has not been in education very long. Let's take the federal government out of education, put that responsibility back on the states where it's always been, and then back on the individual school districts. You know, Texas may figure out a way to teach math that Delaware and New Jersey and California want to copy. Vermont may learn, you know, figure out how to teach history that we want to copy. You know, put it back so you have 50 states all doing their experiments instead of an experiment coming out of the federal government, you know, all 50 states do this. Education's just one. All the departments, as John said, go back to the Constitution. What is the federal government supposed to be doing? And that's what they should do. Everything else should be.
Okay, I know
But the
Reggie
state needs to be fair about where they put their education money, because you get poor districts will get squat, and the rich districts, Dallas, will get all the money. Sorry.
I knew you had something to say.
I was just going to go back to about the part about the prisons, and she just said one of the acts was just passed, which is a great thing. Last week I was just speaking at a prison myself when it spoke to the prisoners and also their families, and I was just sharing some things with them about, you know, life is not over, you know, and that they got to start with the basics themselves, to start improving themselves and really prove to themselves in their head that they're going to get back out. We talking about money, how much money we spend in the prisons. We spend a lot. We spend a lot. A lot of it is, though, for education and doing stuff to help those prisoners come out. I talked to some of them, I mean, head to head and going back again, that they want to do great things, but they're coming back out, and there's a lot of places that will not accept them. And I was talking to one young man, and he was getting ready to come out, but he was so fired up for coming out because he was going back to the basics of going back to his community to go work for that little mom and pop shop or whatever. He was just so excited about doing that. And all I did was just looked up in the air, so I just pray that they accept him to come back out there. Now, we got a lot of people in prison that are doing for minor things that we got. We spending a lot of money. And I see some of the things that they're doing in there. I tell you, we really, really need to look at that. But it has helped, and we did have an act just approved for some of that, but we still got a lot of work to do.
Yes, Chet.
When I first came to Texas a long time ago, I got involved through a company I was working for. We got involved with the Department of Corrections here in the state of Texas. At that point in time, and this was back in the mid-1980s, they had training programs. If you were a company and had specific skills that you were looking for, you could go through the Department of Corrections. They'd put together a training program, and they would start working with convicts who were incarcerated, saying, you know, if you want a job when you get out, you got to learn a skill, and here's a good skill to learn. And we would bring people from wherever they were incarcerated here to El Paso. We'd set them up in an apartment. They'd have a job, and they would be working for us. And we had virtually no recidivism from those people, but they came to us with a reasonable amount of skill in an industrial place where we needed that skill, and those people weren't going to be trained anywhere else. So for us, it worked. And it's I think, going back to something John said earlier, it's little by little, the way his dad said. But what we need to do is look at where the private sector can supplant the public sector, and we can grow our economy by doing better in the private sector, and at the same time, we should be able to reduce our tax load by getting rid of different functions that the private sector can take over that the government has taken on for whatever reason.
Yes, I have to throw in just a quick comment regarding the penal system, and that is that we're very fortunate in El Paso County to have an exceptional juvenile probation department, and it accounts, basically it's one of the luckiest things that happens to a lot of young people to become incarcerated as juveniles, because they are diagnosed properly, and intervention really is exemplary in our community. So that's another perspective on the prison issue. Joanna?
There is a private organization here in El Paso which is called Borderplex. And this organization, Borderplex, is working with industries. And as far as I know, the industries came up with a program how to educate young people here in order to be useful to certain industries. Because it came out that the schools, the local schools, vocational schools, are not really preparing the people to the necessities of the industry. So I think, answering to my predecessor, Chad, yes, that giving more possibility to the private sector and there to education instead of a federal huge institution that obviously doesn't work as it should, I think this is also one of the solutions of lowering our debt and making the people work.
Thank you. Franklin?
We used to have what they called the Works Progress Administration. And what happened, they had all kinds of people that were unemployed, that were receiving welfare and food stamps and housing. So what they decided to do, they said, look, we have a terrible infrastructure problem in the United States, so why don't we put them to work to build our roads? They'll get paid instead of getting welfare and food. They'll have their own money, they'll be taxed, and we'll get the infrastructure done. A good example was here in El Paso when all the maquiladoras moved to Taiwan and to South America. A lot of the women that 50 years old, single moms, that were working in factories, they wanted to work. When they closed the factories there, they closed the factories here, so they all went on welfare. So the U.S. Department of Labor decided to train them. First of all, most of them didn't speak English, to train them in new jobs so they can get off of welfare and go to work. And it worked. The women didn't want to be on welfare. They were single moms with their children. They wanted to provide for the children, not just get by. And because the government invested money in those 50-year-old women, single moms, they now work and their children have a nice life instead of being on welfare, which it was not their fault when all the factories closed. So that's part of what I say is they need to decide to spend the money in a way where it not only gives them money, but it gives them the ability to make money and pay taxes back into the government for other programs, and also trains them to get off of welfare and gives them money.
Mary?
Okay, I think we're coming to the end of the show, so just to recap what everybody said, government is the most inefficient person or entity to take care of problems. Okay, that being said, I think we can cut from every single department in our budget. When we look at the Department of Education, we should do away with it completely. It has not educated one person in the United States. The Department of Energy, I'm trying to figure out how much energy they have produced over time. Not a drop of oil. The private companies do. When we look at higher education, why has college tuition gone up 250%? And all the colleges say they still don't have enough money. So there's a lot of introspection and review that needs to be done in so many organizations, so many agencies, on so many levels. And like Reggie says, it gets down to your own budget. How many of us have a family member who cannot manage money? But they always come to you to bail them out. So it really is that simple. Money in versus money out.
About 30 seconds. If you had your congressperson's ear, what would you say? What would you ask for that could make a difference?
To listen to the people. To listen to the people instead of special interest.
Shorten your bills. One subject, 20 pages or less.
Back to the basics.
Basics being?
Back in coming down to listening to people. That is basics.
Okay.
Infrastructure, our roads especially.
We have the money for that.
That's what I would say. We need to do things for the public and not for your private interests.
Like the rule of two fingers. These are your income and these are your spendings.
Ooh, I like that one. Okay, I think the wisdom could go on and on here this evening. I want to thank the panel. What a marvelous job of talking about a very complex topic. And I also want to thank our callers this evening. If you've been listening to our program and you would like to express your opinion, there's a vehicle for that. Go to NIFI, that's, let me see if I remember this, Nancy Indigo Fox Indigo, how'd I do, .org, and there's a questionnaire there that you can complete with your responses to this evening's forum. So I invite you to do that. Tonight's discussion was the second of 3 national issues forums conducted every year in the springtime. The next forum is going to be on May 7th, also a Tuesday. Our topic, Keeping America Safe, National Security. Now, if you or your organization would like to participate in the National Issues Forums, you can call KCO West during regular business hours. That's 590-1313. And also, NIF, the forums, can provide a trained moderator if you would like to sponsor a forum. So, I think we've covered it all. Thank you so much for viewing and for calling in for the National Issues Forum. I'm Monica Gomez. Good night.